All right, we have been talking about the different types of engines now. So we had, what did we cover? The opposed. We started to talk about inline engines. Inline engines are, there we go. Inline engines. All the cylinders are lined up in a row. What's funny about this engine right here? They put it in upside down, the idiots. I have never seen an aircraft inline engine. I take it by Rotax. I think they go up, but the inline engines that I'm aware of in they were factored. This is I think a Ranger engine. They put the cylinders upside down. Why would they put them upside down?
Pilot visibility over the engine.
Pilot disability over the engine. You're almost right. Pilot visibility over the engine. Well, wait a minute. Isn't this the same height if you turn it around the other way?
But then the
prop is lower.
Yeah. And the prop is lower. So then the prop is lower, then you have a problem with the prop being too low. So you have to raise the landing gear. So this brings it way up here, the prop shaft, so that the prop doesn't drag on the ground and provides better visibility than what would otherwise be if the cylinders are even taller up there, which would not be a good thing. All right, so inline engines, they have a single row of cylinders.
No twin banks? Or FSD, sorry.
Single row of cylinders. I built a couple of Rangers in my day. They're beautiful engines on the inside. Absolutely beautiful workmanship. Let's see. So there would be two configurations, which would be crank on bottom, like the older Rotax, or crank on top, like that Ranger. And there's a British version too of, they look just like the Ranger to me. So I don't know. What would be the pros here? Well, being in line, you have a lot of cylinders being in line, so there'd be less surface area, so there'd be less drag. Should go less drag. Let's see. Inverted has better pilot visibility. What are my cons?
Long.
They're long.
What did you call the center of weight? I forgot how you said
Oh, the CG?
center of the engines.
Oh yeah, I don't even have that one. But he's right. They're going to be much longer. So we put that on there.
Oh, maybe you would say.
Wouldn't the power impulses be a little wonky on that one?
Not really.
On a six-cylinder, it's the smoothest it can get, the straight sixes.
Yeah, that's think about what is BMW like? Oh, they're V6s. Difficult to cool the backs. Very difficult. Difficult to cool back cylinders.
Low horsepower?
Huh?
Low horsepower? That be a con?
No, you just make them bigger, you get the horsepower. So, but poor power to weight ratio.
What do say the Rangers do to help at least cool those rear half cylinders?
Oh, the baffling on them is just
Heavier.
It's so much of it. There's so much of this metal baffle that goes around everything. You can't even see it on this, but you can't even see the cylinders. It encases them, and they try and pick it up, and you have to do something with the cowling to get in there. So these back cylinders just running real hot. The pilots that I've talked to, they're just like, oh, they run hot and get very melty. The other thing, and I don't really have it on here, is think about it. The oil has got to be now stored in a tank, and it's got to be pumped into the engine. It's going to go through the engine, and what's it going to do? It's going to come through here, down through the lower cylinders, down in here to a sump. The sump's got to have we'll talk about this later, but a scavenge pump. The scavenge pump's got to pump it out back into the tank. Also, when cylinders are upside down like this, you have a problem with oil getting into the cylinders, leaking around the rings while it's not running and filling up the bottom of the engine or the cylinders. So you get hydraulic lock, and that is you just don't like get this little
You don't have that. When you get high.
bump. Yeah, I've got a picture of a hydraulic lock in here somewhere. Yeah.
I was wondering, could you possibly circumvent the problem of your cylinders getting hotter by installing an intake that cools those cylinders at all, or no?
Another baffle inlet section.
Right.
No, I'm sure they do something, but it's very difficult. Once we talk about cooling, you'll see you have to have, and they call it a delta P or change of pressure. So you have to have an opposite pressure on the other side. So how do you get that negative pressure on the other side? You can have a positive side and negative side. You don't just blow at it. It's much more complicated than that.
It has to have a way through.
Yep. So you have to have a positive pressure side and a negative pressure side. All right, so that brings me to radial engines. Radial engines, let's see. Everybody's favorite because they're cool and they sound awesome. A lot of different radials. Let's see. This will be, I'll enlarge it, see if you guys can figure out who's what. 9-cylinder, so probably Pratt & Whitney 985. That'd be 985 cubic inch, 450 horsepower, supercharged. One of my more favorites, just because this is what I worked on. These actually were tank engines. They just had a different crankshaft, but they used them in World War II tanks. The Continental W670. Thank you. 670 cubic inch out of 7 cylinders, producing 220 horsepower. Overhauled a lot of those. Lycoming made one. They made one in a couple different versions. If the exhaust goes on the front, it's a 300 horsepower. Our W670, it's 9 cylinders. I don't remember. 670. It'll come to me later, but anyway. R680, I think. R680.
Yeah, I think you were looking it up yesterday, R680.
Yeah, R680. This is the 300 horsepower version, 9 cylinders. Has an internal diffuser that looks like a supercharger, but it just doesn't turn fast enough to supercharge. And
That one that's out there I was asking about, like,
maybe,
last
yeah.
year.
Yeah. And I think this is a Kinner 5-cylinder radial.
Thing looks tight.
If I was really cool, I would know what. Probably a Stearman, definitely a Stearman. I forget the PT rating. And another Stearman, and the whatever Stearman biplane, they're World War II primary trainers. So it's PT, primary trainer. And even though that's a Boeing Stearman, and that's a Boeing Stearman, and that's a Boeing Stearman, that's an aftermarket engine. The designator changed with the engines, not that matters. And then I forget, that's also a primary trainer of some. I don't know if anybody knows that, but I always forget. Anyway, so those are my radial engines. What do we got next? Another one. Okay, we'll talk about that one in a minute.
Oh, there it is.
Big one. Okay, radial engines. Let's see. The crankcase is mounted. Crankcase is mounted to engine. Oh, that doesn't make sense. Hang on a second. Aircraft. Okay. On the radial, not the rotaries, or the gnome. So we have the crankcase. Crankcase is mounted to aircraft, and crank rotates. Right? Just like a normal engine would. Like your 290, all the opposed, everything but a gnome. Let's see. So single row radial has odd number of cylinders. And a double row would then have even. Even number of cylinders. Like 2 wrongs don't make a right, but 3 lefts do. 2 odds make an even. Let's see. In a double row radial, the cylinders are staggered for cooling, which means you have row number 1 up front, has them here, right back. You kind of just move it so that one peeks out between the two of them. Let's see, what are my pros?
Way good.
Pros, man, they are sturdy. Many stories of engines blowing cylinders right off and just keep on flying. How do you know if a radial engine has oil in it?
It's leaking.
It's leaking. If it stops leaking, you better add some oil. Sturdy. I hate this. I wrote lowest weight to power ratio. Does that mean it's the best or the worst?
Best power to weight, lowest weight to power.
Yeah, I'm not going to write it because I'm not sure what I meant to write. Good cooling.
It seems like it was kind of small relative, and they always produce like 400 horsepower.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, no, not necessarily like that one. The Continental one, that's 670 cubic inches and only 220 horsepower.
Oh. Well, that Wasp is like what? 2,500?
But they're-
4,300 horsepower with 71.
Yeah.
I'm going to write it lowest, L-O-W. Well, I wrote it under a pro, so
Just think about how much it would take to get 3,000 horsepower out of like an inline or like an opposed engine. I feel like it
lowest weight to power
All the cylinders.
ratio. I wrote it under a pro, so that must be a good thing.
You could rewrite it
All right,
as-
cons.
no, you could rewrite it as best power to ratio.
I know, that's why I said it. I should have, and that's why I usually do on everything else. It's either best or worst. Large frontal area. Take exception to that. Large frontal area means they're wide. I mean, they're not very deep. So, let me see. The inverted cylinders. Inverted cylinders are prone to hydraulic lock. Any self-respecting radial engine pilot, after the aircraft has been sitting for any period of time, they will go up, they will pull the prop through by hand a couple revolutions to make sure that you don't have a hydraulic lock. So, well, they'll put that pull through by hand. Pull through by hand to check for hydraulic lock. Which way should you pull it? Direction of rotation or opposite direction of rotation? A good safe rule of thumb is to always pull it through backwards. Because you guys know with an impulse coupling, if you're pulling it through at a rate of about that, you can start it.
The Q&A questions.
Does it say the direction of rotation? I don't know of any radial engine that has impulse couplings. They have, what do they have? Trailing finger. They're very different magnetos, but they don't have impulse couplings. So you're kind of safe doing it. Let's see. Common radials. Why did I put this for 6? Common. Oh, we don't need to go over that. Just ignore that. It's just like, as Phil would say, gee whiz information. It's not. I had the W670. Oh, I just had the pictures of them. Go back to them. The W670, 7-cylinder, 220 horsepower. That is this one here, the upper right. The Lycoming R680. Yeah, it was right. 225 to 300 horsepower. Got that one right. And the Pratt & Whitney R985 up here, 9 cylinders, 450 horsepower. And the next size, that's the Junior Wasp, they call it. Then you have the Wasp, which so that's the smallest Pratt & Whitney right there, the 985.
And
Then
then the Wasp and the Twin Wasp. And the
well, then you have the Junior, then the Wasp, which is the big next size up, the 1340 at 600 horsepower. Let's see, the Boeing. Oh, okay, just for fun now. Yeah.
So like horsepower is what interests people the most, and it's not like like in cars like torque is what you really want.
Yeah, I was thinking about that yesterday. I'm like, wow, what if somebody asked me just between torque and horsepower? And I honestly have tried very, very hard to find really good information that is very succinct about this is what torque means, this is what horsepower means. And I have yet to find an article that really describes it. So we don't really talk in torque in aircraft. We just talk strictly horsepower, which is good. It just means it's one thing to worry about. So, yeah. Let me see. Is this the R? The biggest radial Pratt & Whitney built was the R4360, which has 28 cylinders producing 3,500 horsepower.
It's the Wasp Major.
Double
Yeah.
Wasp Major.
Is that what it is?
And
There's a bunch of different versions of it.
This one went in. Oh, the B-29 used the R3350 twin row 18 cylinder,
Yeah, the twin wasp.
which was 2,200 to 3,700 horsepower. This one right here, I think I have a picture of.
they did modify
Yeah.
the.
So the one I just showed you
28 cylinder.
was used in that one.
What did it?
The F2G Super Corsair used it. I think that one is the one they put twin turbocharge and a supercharger on it.
Yeah, they had a PRT. We'll talk about that in another class. So what is, and this is all just kind of just for fun stuff, what is the largest radial engine ever built?
That one?
No.
It did not go into production. Which one?
This is the biggest one that made it to an aircraft.
Into production, yep. Lycoming had one they were set to go into production with. War ended, they didn't get to put it in. This is a 4360. It is the XR 7755. 7,755 horsepower. I'm sorry, not horsepower, cubic inch displacement.
Oh.
So 7,750 cubic inch. Had 36 cylinders. That's 4 rows of 9. It produced 7,000 horsepower.
Pretty close. Pretty good.
It is 10 feet long, and it's only 5 feet in diameter, which is kind of funny. That is just that far in diameter. So this is 6 feet. So just about that. That's to me that's pretty small.
How short are
So it
these
looks
men?
It looks like it's not air cooled. It looks like it might be water cooled.
Yeah, it does look water cooled.
It looks like it's got inline bank.
Let's see. It weighed 6,050 pounds. All right, you ready for the gallons per hour?
Not
All
enough.
Wait, let's guess.
All of it.
Okay, give me a guess.
100.
Three-digit numbers.
Okay, for comparison, my 0470 on takeoff burns 18 gallons an hour.
Okay, we're going way.
I'll do 127.
250.
250 gallons per hour?
I'm gonna guess 200.
200 gallons per hour.
120.
200 gallons? Is that what it is?
No, I'm just taking numbers.
Okay.
350.
You got 350.
One of these
Yeah,
Are we all done guessing? We all done guessing? 1 gallon. Okay, 'cause you can't go over. Who's that?
Yeah, it was also the most amazing.
Well, no, it's like the Price is Right. Somebody's got to yell 1 gallon, you know. So like
per second.
580 gallons per hour. That is almost 10 gallons a minute at max horsepower.
That's a lot of sound.
Wow.
All right.
Yeah, can you even carry that?
You said
He put it on a really big plane.
With that horsepower, dude, you're getting there.
Okay. Let's see. We have the Gnome rotary. Okay, the Gnome rotary crankshaft. The crankshaft is mounted to the aircraft, and the crankcase and cylinders rotate. All right, pros.
Yeah, it's weird. You make a lot of nerdy friends.
So you can just follow it along. You'll see like that one's out top dead center. Now the piston's coming back out, bottom dead center, top dead center. if I just wanted to cancel that? And I'm like, now it's all pissed me off. There we go. Back to where I was. What comes next?
That sounds really like a dangerous thing to do.
I'm going to go back one. Let me see. See, do we have a radial here? Winkles team.
Yep. Well, that's a no.
Yeah, I don't have just a plain old radial engine. One of the problems with a radial engine is, and we'll get into this later, it only has one throw on the crankshaft. So a single row radial, like you guys have 4 throws on your crankshaft. That's where the connecting rod attaches. Well, because all the cylinders are in a line, there's not staggered, you only have one throw, and that one throw has to do all the cylinders. And so you have a master and articulating rod set, which we'll get into later. But you have to have a counterweight on the opposite side, much like, I saw a picture here a second ago. Just like our 4-stroke engine that we've been looking at. If you have one throw, the opposite side has to have a counterweight to account for the rotating mass that's up here. So radial engines have a gigantic counterweight hanging off of them. Well, one of the things about a gnome is they don't have to have they don't have a counterweight because the crankshaft does not move. So no counterweight. Awesome cooling. Not only were the cylinders just out there in the air, they're spinning around too. So they got fantastic cooling. So they have the blast in front of them, and then they create their own blast rotating around. Some of the problems with them, and they're funny. So it was kind of a race to see what ran out first, oil or fuel. And so they ran on castor oil. So let's see here. Centrifugal force threw oil out after its first trip through the engine. So it went through the engine and then just was thrown by centrifugal force out. So flight time was limited by oil quantity, and it used castor oil. So you see the pictures of the pilots with their silk scarf, right? That was literally to wipe the castor oil off their faces and their goggles. Now, there's a funny little byproduct of castor oil to the human body. Does anybody know what that is?
Laxative.
It gives you the poops. So the glamorous side of being a pilot was that. So
they also came equipped with holes in the seats.
yes, so they're not only nauseated, in my notes, but they had the poops.
Literally dropping bombs.
Yes.
I thought
All right.
biological warfare was banned.
Yes. Not only that, do you guys remember Phil's class with the helicopter and the centrifugal force and spinning stuff and gyroscopic precession? Mm-hmm. All right, well, you have a big old massive metal spinning on the front of the engine. You're going to have a gyroscopic effect on the engine, or the airframe. So these things apparently that had these were absolutely horrific at making any kind of turn because they had a big gyroscope on the front of the airplane. Okay, so let's see.
I'm sure it'd do a nice roll one way too.
Oh, and my understanding, I never worked on one or flew one, thankfully, is they didn't have a throttle. They had what's called, because they're French, it's called a coup switch. It's spelled like COUP or something like that.
Oh, I thought you said they didn't have a throttle because they were French.
I didn't say that. But anyway, what they had was a coup switch. And what that did is it grounded out the magnetos. So when your finger was off of it, it would run wide open throttle.
Suicide, damn.
And so when you held it, the magnetos would be grounded and the engine would idle down.
So you just click it a bunch of times?
So that's what I'm saying. You want to idle, you got to,
Yeah, gamers are probably really good at that.
I know, yeah. So, so anyway. Nice and smooth.
Sounds like a two-stroke.
Yeah.
Sounds like a
All right, so let's see. Gnome rotary, the pros. Well,
Best cooling.
no need for counterweights for crank. Counterweight. That's probably the best thing you could say about it. And great cooling, I guess. Great cooling. Cons, I could just put mini.
The rest.
Everything else, yeah. We had oiling problems. Ran out of oil. Poop. All right. All right, then we have the Wankel, so often called the rotary cycle, which is the Wankel cycle. All right, let's see. It is still, the rotary is still a four cycle, but I wouldn't call it a four-stroke. It's called a four-cycle for obvious reasons. So it uses just look at this. Uses a rotor inside an elliptical housing. We looked at this the other day, right? Where it still has intake, combustion, compression, ignition. What did I miss? Intake, power. Missed the most important one. Happening. And if we follow any one of these around, we'll see all of the cycles. So intake, compression. There's compression. Ignition, power, exhaust. So it's still all happening. So let's see.
It's just kind of
Yep.
combining.
Doing it a little different in different
intake,
places.
exhaust,
Yeah.
What were those seals you're talking about made of?
Yeah.
I was thinking about that.
Yeah, what are they made of?
I don't know.
I think they're just like yours.
Uses a rotor that turns in an elliptical housing. Uh, 3 power pulses per rotation. I didn't do cons and pros. I just have fewer moving parts.
Can't you technically increase your power pulses by changing the shape from triangle to like a star?
Have you seen any?
I never tried it. Yeah, no pistons, rods, or cam, no pistons, rods, cam, or valves. It's a lot fewer parts.
Super light.
Yeah, okay, yeah, they are. Can have multiple rotors. So it's one behind another. They're supposedly really smooth. I just think they were really bad for smog, and so they kind of.
Because they burn a lot of oil through all those seals.
Yeah, probably not anymore. The last, yes, in Mazda. well, our-
Just this article, they're looking at putting together a team to start trying to bring these back.
They apparently make they make fluid pumps like this, that same system.
Yeah.
How much does a regular,
What?
how much does a regular engine have? How many power pulses? Non-rotary one?
One per every 4 cycle. Well, if you only had a 1-cylinder engine, it'd be once for every 2 rotations.
And then so.
This has 3 per rotation.
There's also not a RPM limit technically, right? You can run these as fast as they'll go. They'll go up.
Yeah, sure, eventually.
It's like, oh man, like
80 gajillion RPM.
Just, like,
Your
really like
limit
high
is
RPM,
no
like,
more
you have,
RPM
like,
after.
like I think 8 or 9,000.
Because they have no, they have such little reciprocating mass to them. They have, you have to rev them higher. Otherwise they-
All right, that brings me to diesel / compression ignition / Jet A. So Jet A is very similar to diesel. In fact, we were just having a conversation out the hangar today. Larry was talking about he runs Jet A in his motorhome, which has a Cat engine in it. The guys I worked with had Ford F-350s. They'd love to run Jet A in those things.
Is it taxed?
No. That's why they ran it. That's the whole point.
Might as well just run red dye.
Well,
It's still taxed, and that's so hard to find.
when you defuel an aircraft,
You reuse it.
especially a jet aircraft, you're talking a lot of money. You don't put the fuel back in. You dispose of it, and the cheapest way to dispose of it was for people to burn it, rather than paying somebody to haul it off. So that's
We used to defuel, but then to refuel, we had to set up our trucks very specially.
Oh, yeah.
Check it after we pull it off. Swap all our filters around before putting it back on. It's a pain.
yeah. We didn't have that. We just put it in barrels, and it was
Yeah,
like, well,
that's the easiest way to do it.
Yeah.
We'd actually bill people that way. Like, how many gallons you got? We'll charge you the disposal fee for
Yep.
it.
And
That's
then-
cheaper than trying to give it back to you.
So some people might call it a diesel. Some people might, but really we don't use diesel fuel in aviation. We use Jet A, which is very similar. A proper name would be compression ignition, because a diesel or compression ignition engine does not use a spark plug. Yes, they have glow plugs, which is just something to help ignite the fuel for its first run. But once it starts running, it's purely the heat of compression that causes the fuel to ignite. So there is no timing. The only timing you have would be valves. And the other thing about these type of engines is you will notice that the intake, when it goes intake, watch, intake, what do you see?
Nothing.
Nothing. It's not a fuel-air mixture.
Just there.
It's just air until the injector injects the fuel in there. So it has direct injection. So the pressure up here on this injector nozzle, which they call it the fuel rail, is something like 30,000 PSI.
Depends on what it is, yeah.
Yeah.
We're up to like 70,000, I believe.
Okay, yeah, it's just huge numbers. Now, technology in the last 10 years, many of you might even be driving gasoline cars that have direct injection. Does anybody know? If you
I'm
have a
not.
car? Yeah, you're not. Yeah. Yeah, my last car had direct injection, which, I'm going to get off topic, is a really bad thing for cars, because we have a thing called an EGR valve, which takes all of, in aircraft, you're always going to build up some sort of crankcase pressure, because this pressure works its way past the pistons, past the rings. When the piston is coming up, it doesn't squeeze all that air. Some of it squeezes around the rings. And that means that the crankcase gets pressure in it. That's just what happens. Well, for us in aviation, that crankcase pressure is vented right out overboard. And cars used to be that way, but now because of EPA rules, they don't want that. So you have these nasty fumes and stuff. They vent the crankcase back through the intake pipe. So what happens is you get a lot of, I don't want to say sludge, but it's a sludgy kind of nastiness starts building up on the intake valve. Well, if you use Chevron with Techron and had a carburetor or fuel injection, that washes all that stuff off into the engine and it keeps everything nice and clean. But when you have a direct injection, you have all this nastiness comes through the intake valve, and that stuff gets all caked off, and then you have to take your car in and get them decarburized every so many miles, which is a pain. But anyway, so yeah.
What's the difference between the EGR and like the PCV valve, like the positive crankcase ventilation?
I think maybe
Is that-
that's what I meant to say.
Okay.
Exhaust gas.
Research.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was like, wait.
Yeah.
All right.
Positive crankcase ventilation versus exhaust gas. I think it's the same. I don't know. Yeah.
Are there differences between Jet A and the military fuel like JP5, JP8, JP3? 3.
There are, forget, obviously there would be because those differences
The
between them.
additives
Those
they put in there.
differences are for temperature ranges, but we never saw a difference in any of it. It all ran at the same temperature.
Yeah, I'm not sure which Jet A fault category that falls in. And if there's even a Jet B, I don't know.
There is a Jet B.
Is there?
It's for cold temperature operation.
There you go.
There you go.
You know how much Jet A I run in my airplane? Not
None.
much. Hopefully not much.
Only once.
All right, compression, ignition, let's see. Can be 2 or 4-stroke. I don't have a lot of comments about that one. I think they're mostly 4-stroke. So 4-stroke operates just like a gasoline engine, except for the direct injection.
Would they use a diesel engine on an aircraft? Where, when, what aircraft use it?
The DA-62 uses.
All their Diamond Stars use them.
Okay.
So Thielert, I think, was the first one to come out with them. They were a German company, and they used a Mercedes engine. We have one out on our one.
Are these antique or are they?
No, they're
They're modern.
they used them. What I was told, it was an A class, the one similar to the one they used in the A class. So they were importing the engines before we had A class here. I have this right. And so we have a Thielert branded one on our 172, and it's just a Mercedes engine. And then Thielert went out of business, got bought out by Continental Motors, and then Continental then rebranded it, and they still produce it. And there's also one other company that I'm aware of that has the diamonds.
Yeah, Diamond Star.
But I
all
don't-
their model range is
I think
offered
they
with
make
them.
their own engine. I'm not sure.
I don't know
It's like
what
a
the engine
Chinese
is.
company that bought them out. It's
Okay. So yeah, so they're my opinion, the good thing about them is that Jet A is a little more forgiving of a fuel. It's you don't have to deal with octane rating. And our avgas, if you have a problem with your octane, any contamination, you'll destroy the engine. So I know like missionary aircraft that, different countries and stuff, they're switching everything they can over to jet fuel just simply for that reason. They're so worried about contamination and the ease of getting it. Yeah.
JP8 is real similar to Jet.
Okay.
So there's a military.
Did Jet A kind of not last? Does Jet A not go bad as quickly as, per se, like avgas?
Avgas has a very long life.
Does it? Okay.
But okay, so my
We're talking
point
about
is,
how you store and maintain it. Okay.
for example, there was a situation here it was a long time ago for you guys, where there was an air show. I think it was at Executive Airport, and if you flew your airplane into the air show, you got gas, and they accidentally leaked a little bit of Jet A into the 100 low lead. Everybody who got a fill up got a free engine from Chevron. Let's turn it around. Let's just say a little bit of 100 low lead leaks into some Jet A. I don't think anybody cares. At worst, you're going to get a little lead deposit on a few things, but a little bit of leakage isn't going to hurt anything. So,
Well, certain jet engines too are rated. I know for King Airs, there's a rating for them to run off of.
Yeah.
low lead.
yeah, for a certain period of time. So,
Every air show.
let's see, where do we got here?
It's one way.
Yeah, except for direct injection, we're good with that. We're getting off on the wrong things, let me tell you. No ignition system. All it has is a glow plug, which is just a little piece of wire, if you will, that glows red hot inside the cylinder for initial startup.
Cigar.
In fact, what?
It's like a cigar lighter.
Cigar lighter, exactly. I don't know, anybody have a diesel car truck in here? Yeah, do you turn it on and wait for the glow plug light to go off before you crank it? Some people do. Some people just go.
Do that.
no, not really.
All right.
Uh,
Yeah.
2016.
Your parents bought it, you don't care.
Just leave it plugged in all night.
Got the diesel. I'm not going to write about this. This is one of the first Curtiss OX-5, early American V8 liquid-cooled aircraft engine built by Curtiss. It was the first American-designed aircraft engine to enter mass production, although it was considered obsolete when it did so in 1917. So, what kind of engine is this? A V style. I wish you can see the carburetor down there. You know the original carburetor on the Wright Flyer? It simply dripped fuel into like a little thing of like rocks or something that were hot. It was weird. And it's like,
It worked.
all right, moving on to some other stuff. All right, let's talk about. I don't care about safety hazard. Compression ratio. Compression ratio. It's kind of a big deal in engines, and it has a lot to do with what kind of fuel you have to run. So a compression ratio, it is the ratio, which is a difference of two things, of the volume of the cylinder at bottom dead center versus top dead center. So in other words, I take a cylinder and, like I talked about yesterday, plug the bottom hole, because there's always two holes for spark plugs, and we put the piston all the way at bottom dead center, and we fill the whole thing up, and we measure how much fluid filled up the whole thing. All right? Then bring it all the way up to top dead center, and it's going to push out that fluid. We'll measure that fluid and see how much came out, and whatever's left over is what's still in there. So it's the ratio of full versus top dead center. That much versus that much. So if a cylinder contains 50 cubic inches, I wrote of air, we'll say of fluid, but it is air, keep that in mind, at bottom dead center, and 10 inches cubed of fluid at top dead center, then the compression ratio is 50 to 10 or 5 to 1. Why do we care? Well, maybe you don't. Increasing the compression ratio increases power and efficiency. So not all engines are the same. Some have low compression ratios and some have high compression ratios. But then you ask yourself, if increasing the compression ratio increases power and efficiency, then why wouldn't every engine just have really high compression ratio? Oh, there's no extra weight. It's practically free. Oh, I'm sorry. I know what you're thinking. Yeah, you could, a little bit extra weight. You got to build things a little beefier because, you know, you put a little extra pressure on there.
Reliability.
Well, let's think about your cars. Are all cars, do they all have the same compression ratio?
No.
Let's say an American car versus a German car. So I guess I should define, what's a reasonably priced American-made car?
Ford Focus.
Ford Focus. That's a good one. Would a Ford Focus have a high or low compression ratio? Low. How about a BMW, what's the 5 Series?
633 CSI.
Yeah, would that have a high or low?
Inline 6, 200 horsepower.
How about the i3? No, that's doesn't count. It's electric, right? No, so that would that high compression or low compression?
Probably both of them.
Very high. How do you know if your car is high compression or low ratio or low?
Manual.
Is it turbocharged or natural aspirated?
Nope.
Requires a higher octane.
Oh, higher octane.
When
Yeah.
you pull up to the gas station, we'll talk a lot about that later on, but if your car says on there requires 91 octane minimum, then you have a high compression ratio. If you have one that says it'll run on what's low, 87, then you have low.
You feel it most in your wallet.
I was
Yes.
really thinking about that. There's some old guys in this Facebook group and arguing about the motorcycle habits like a 10-to-1 compression ratio or something like that. And people were like saying they run higher octane. Everyone's like, there's no point because the compression ratio isn't like high enough. So it's like you just like waste your money if you're like getting the higher octane for no
Yes.
reason.
So for those people who are like, oh yes, they have their Ford Focus. I baby my car. I only put premium in it. You are out literally just throwing money down the
Yeah.
You don't have a better car than
tailpipe.
Focus.
Yeah,
Propagating
because
that word premium.
it's not better or worse fuel. My opinion, where you get it matters. If you go to Arco, now you're getting crap. I'm sorry, I said that on camera. I don't buy it. They charge ATM fees. I don't like them. But anyway, we'll talk about fuel later. But yeah, that's just a waste of time. So increasing compression ratio increases power and efficiency. But you get to a point, the higher the compression ratio, the more likely you have detonation. And that's why you have different octane fuels. We'll get into that more later. But that's why when you go to the pump, if you've got your Mercedes or BMW, those people should be putting premium, the higher octane, because they have higher compression ratio engines, which require it. The other engines are low compression ratio. They don't. They're not going to detonate. So what happens if you put the low-grade fuel in a high-compression car engine? Well, it's going to start knocking, but it has a knock sensor. It's going to back it off, the timing off, and you're just going to lose power. Am I right on that? Because you know cars pretty well. Right. What happens if you do that in an airplane? You will destroy your engine and crash. Literally. So when I first got into aviation, we had two different fuels. You could pull up to the pump and get red colored 8087, or you could get the 100 low lead. And then eventually they got rid of the 8087 and just did the low lead. We'll talk about that later. But you get to a point where your compression ratio is just too high for the octane rating of the fuel, and you can't go any further. So that's the limiting factor. Let me see. I guess my next point. Hey, good for me. Compression ratio. I'll just put CR, compression ratio. Too high causes detonation. And detonation
Is a new motor.
Detonation is like hitting the piston with a sledgehammer. But even worse, versus a push. I think I've used this with you guys before. It'd be like if I wanted to move this table over to that wall. I have three ways of doing it. I want to just ask you guys. But I could either come over here and just get ready and start pushing on it, right? Or I could get a big sledgehammer and just do it one whack at a time. Which one will the table survive? So that's exactly what you're doing to your engine, except worse because it has runaway heat, which causes melting and the hammering effect at the same time. So we do not want that one. So what's another word for detonation?
Knocking.
Knocking or pinging?
Yeah.
We don't call it that in aviation. We just call it detonation. Oh, I got to find that meme. Somebody find it, send it to me. It's got that a completely, totally melted piston. I think a rod hanging out of a crankcase. It's like, knock, knock, who's there? Number 3 piston. It's like something like that. I think it's funny.
Jack already said it.
Yeah, he's probably
I'm
already
not
got
on
it.
it.
All right.
Oh, it's a video?
Let's see. Detonation's like hitting the phone. Okay.
Told you it wasn't me.
In contrast to detonation, there's pre-ignition. And I want to write it here so you know there's a difference between pre-ignition and detonation. Detonation is an uncontrolled explosion of the fuel, which we hear as a knocking or pinging. Pre-ignition is when the fuel-air mixture is ignited too early. By I wrote something other than the ignition system, but it's when it's ignited. Let's just say too early. It can be by the spark plugs themselves, as far as I'm concerned. That's what I'd call pre-ignition, or a hot spot in the cylinder, something like a little glow plug, which shouldn't be inside of a gas engine. So just keep that in mind. So pre-ignition is not the same as detonation. However, pre-ignition can lead to detonation. Pre-ignition by itself is not a bad thing. It's what happens afterwards that could be bad. So if you mistimed a magneto, I would call that pre-ignition. It's igniting before it should happen. That causes higher cylinder pressures. Higher cylinder pressures can lead to detonation, and that could be all bad. So let's see. High compression. Higher compression ratio engines need higher octane fuels. And you will see this on the type certificate data sheet for the engine. It will say minimum octane rating. And these days you'll either see something like 80, 87, or you'll see 100. And my particular aircraft is 100, which means it's a higher compression ratio engine. So, break time.